Welcome to today's webinar on the Flourish SDK. Today, me, Louisa, and my colleague Helena will be introducing you to the SDK. I work at Flourish as head of support and content. So, there it goes. Helping people get to know everything about the platform, how to do things across Flourish, and Helena is a product expert on the team. And today we're going to be splitting this webinar. Tea breaks normally take place every 2 weeks on a different Flourish topic each time. We kind of pick usually a template or an overall topic that a lot of people have kind of showed interest in the past weeks. And today's tea break is a little bit of a special case just because it is touching on some more advanced topics, such as the SDK. And that's why I just wanted to mention at this point that we will be overrunning a bit today because it is a bit of an advanced topic. And so we will be kind of splitting it into an overview, which I will be delivering, kind of what is the SDK, what should you use it for, why should you use it? And then I will be handing over to Helena, who will be creating a simple template. So that's kind of why we've decided to add an extra half hour on today so that we have the time to go through this detailed code example that Helena prepared. As in any other tea break, you can use the chat to ask colleagues that are with me today, such as Ilias, Mafe, and Olivia, any questions, and we will also be here to answer them. And you can also explore the next upcoming sessions, which might be more your cup of tea if you're not that into coding your own templates at flourish.studio/training. And you can also explore lots of existing recordings there. So let's get started. I'd like to start with a question, which is, what is the Flourish SDK? But to start answering that question, we have to take a step back and look at the Flourish architecture more generally. So the Flourish architecture, the way that we all know it and use it, works like this, that you have a template library. So that is the one that is available at app.flourish.studio/templates, kind of every time you log on and click new template, and then you can choose from a bunch of starting points. Those are all based on templates that we create and maintain and update and put into our template library. You can then create visualizations with any of these templates. And then from there on, you can either publish them or download them, or also go on and create stories, which you can then embed on your site as well. So just to show you that in the app quickly, if I jump over, you can see here, this is our template library. So the line bar pie chart is one template, the projection map is one template, and these are all just different starting points, and so on and so forth. And now when we want to answer the question of what the SDK does, we have to go to the next slide, and then we can see where the SDK comes in, which is that you can actually add your own templates to the existing library. So instead of just having the ones that we create, curate, and maintain, so for example, the Lambert pie and the projection map, you could build your own. And you can then upload that, and then that can also appear in the same library, just in a different tab, which I'll show you in a sec. And then in the same way, you can use that to create visualizations, to publish things, to create stories, and to download things. We have lots of content, by the way, on all of the topics that I've covered here, and I'll be linking them in the slides as well. So for example, if you don't know what a story is, you can watch our webinar on that topic and access lots of help docs that we'll be linking in these slides. To look at that again, in the template library, where your own templates, when you do create them using the Flourish SDK, they will show up at the top. If you click on mine, they will show up here. So in my example, I have one which is called projection map. This is kind of just a version of the projection map that I created and published. I haven't really created any others, but if you do start creating your own templates, they will start showing up here. And then just like any other template, you can click to get started, and it will kind of create a new visual in your profile. So that's the overview of kind of where the Flourish SDK fits into the existing architecture and how you can make use of it. And next, we're going to look at that in a bit more detail. So now that I've kind of showed you that background, I can answer the question, what is the SDK, a bit easier. It is a software development kit that enables developers to make powerful reusable templates for interactive content. Anyone can use the SDK, so it's actually free to get started with, and we will also be including links to the developer docs where you can kind of see all the get started guides. But it is the case that if you are in a free account or in a newsrooms account, any template that you create will be publicly accessible. So that means anyone can find the template that you coded and uploaded to the library. But if you're in a company account or in an enterprise or business light, to put it in another term, then those can be private as well. So that means you can create templates specifically for your organization and no one else can kind of use them and yeah, make use of them. So to kind of go through that again, the SDK enables non-developers to make and publish graphics, visualizations and stories from those templates. So anyone can then come and make use of the template that you create, not just developers, but anyone within your organization. And just like I showed before, the templates you've created will show up under mine in the template chooser. And finally, the SDK is actually what we use internally to create and maintain the templates that you see in the regular template chooser. So this session is also a little bit of a peek behind the scenes of what it looks like to work at Flourish as a developer, because our developers use the SDK every day to create new features and publish them, etc. Okay, moving on. I'm going to talk a little bit about why you should be using the SDK and why it's a good idea to maybe move your coding interactive projects into the SDK. And the first and kind of most important point there is that building everything one-off is madness. You're kind of just doing it again and again. Whereas you could be creating this reusable code that you can kind of come into, make changes to, and share with lots of people in your organization to use as well. It also democratizes the data design within your organization because it enables people that are not developers to make use of your code. So anyone can kind of come in and use a template that you've built. An example of this is our template here, which is a template that our services team built for one of our customers, Moody's. And they have this special wheel visualization that is very unique to their organization, and they wanted it to be reusable within their organization. So instead of kind of hiring a developer every year to update it with the latest data, they asked us to create a template in which they can now just use the template to create a new viz and then update the data within the data tab, just like you would any other visualization. So this really then takes off the pressure from kind of hiring a developer to do a one-off project every single time you need one. You can just reuse it again and again. Another reason to use it is because you can easily make use of publishing, downloading, and the generating of embed codes from within the Flourish infrastructure. So if we go back to our Moody's example here, just like any other Flourish viz, I can publish it with the same publish button that you have with our templates. I can download an image of it. I can download the HTML and self-host it. You can also input it to a story and make use of animations through that. And another reason that that kind of comes up from time to time is that you might be whitelisting certain iframe embed types on your domain. So for example, you can create shortcodes to input Flourish visualizations, and those can kind of be whitelisted by default. So this just saves lots of time, so you don't have to worry about, oh, how do I kind of generate a responsive iframe out of my data project? You can kind of rely on this to happen for you. Another reason to use it is that the interface is recognizable. So the settings panel will kind of always be over here. You will always be able to upload data in the data tab here. So especially if you're already using Flourish in your organization, using the templates that we offer off the shelf, creating your own templates to add to that makes sense because people will already know how to use it. And finally, while we don't offer the option to take the templates that we've already created and let you build off of those, we do offer a set of components which you can make use of and include in your templates. And these include everything from colors to controls to things like headers, footers, legends. And you can kind of just plug in these modules, as we call them, and make use of them in your templates. And I'm just going to point you to where you can find more information on this specifically. And that's at developers Flourish Studio /SDK. And then using Flourish modules here, you'll find an overview of exactly what I mean by that. You can see we have a number of public modules that you can really just plug into your templates and then make use of the settings and the different defaults. We're not going to be going into modules in detail in this session, just because that's kind of a more advanced topic, but we will be following up with a more advanced webinar in due course. Okay, then, that is my quick introduction to what the SDK is and why you should use it. Next, I'm going to give you a very quick intro to how you get started, how you install it, and some of the available commands. And then I'm going to hand over to Helena, who will be walking you through an actual template and the different settings that you can change and the different things you have to keep in mind. So the first thing is I'm just going to jump back into my developer documentation here, just because the command that I'm going to be using is noted here. So I just want to make sure that you're aware that this all exists here, so you don't have to take too many notes. We have this get started page where it walks you through the steps to install. So the first step is that you're going to want to type this into your terminal or your command prompt, depending on which kind of device you're using. I've already installed the SDK, so I'm just going to skip this step. But in terms of what this does is just it creates the shortcut. It makes it possible for your device to pick up on shortcuts that have to do with Flourish. So once you've done this, you can start typing things like Flourish new or Flourish help, and your computer will understand that you're trying to do something with Flourish and will help you do that because you've kind of installed that language for it. So I'm just going to show you an example of that in my by bringing up my terminal here. And because I already have the SDK installed, I can just do things like type Flourish help. And then it will give me an overview of all the different commands that exist. Flourish help is just one of the commands that might be useful. And I just wanted to quickly demo that to show you that that's basically what the installing of the SDK does. If you hit any errors or aren't able to install it with this, you might need to make sure that you have Node and NPM installed first, and otherwise please let us know in the chat or via email and we can try and help. Next, I'm going to create a new template from scratch and show you kind of what is included in that, because what you can do with this SDK is you can type Flourish new and then a template name, and then it will kind of create all the files that you will need to get started with your template. So you don't have to worry about getting everything in the right structure and which file format you need and things like that, but you that is done for you. So to bring up my terminal again, oh, it's over here. I'm just quickly gonna go to the place where I want to save my template. So I'm going to move into my documents folder and into my Flourish folder. And now I'm going to do Flourish new, and I'm going to call this webinar demo template. And then you can hit enter, and then you can see it starts running this command where it's creating a skeleton template in the directory webinar demo template. And then it's running npm install. So it's installing all the different dependencies that we need. So that's kind of all done for you through the SDK. And then it says it's created the new template. And now you can do Flourish run webinar demo template. What you do when you do Flourish run webinar demo template, I'm just quickly going to go into it to show you what that looks like. If I now do Flourish run, then it will actually start running it in a local browser for me. And then I can preview it here. 1685, I believe, because that apparently is the birthday of Bach, I think, and one of our co-founders' favorite composers is Bach. But anyway, so now we can see I'm running my template locally, and that is what the SDK enables you to do. It enables you to create a new template, an empty one, as we can see here, and run that locally with all the short codes and commands. But just to, oh dear, I didn't want to show my messy desktop. Just to go take a step back and actually look at the structure of that template, is to, if we look into the generated folder, we can see that it now includes lots of different files. So I have a guide.md file. This is the template guide, which is what displays when you look at the overview page of a template. I'll just quickly bring up an example. So if I look at this Limebar Pi overview page, we can see it has kind of how to use this template getting started. So that's what this guide.md is. You can just include things in Markdown, some examples, some starting points. It includes an index.html file, which is where we're building the basic structure into which we will later inject content using JavaScript. It also includes this less file, which is the styles. You can also use CSS. We just used less in this case as the default. The node modules, as well as the package lock and package JSON, you shouldn't have to touch, at least not for the beginning. This is just installing all the dependencies and node modules that you need. Then we also have the source folder, which is where our index.js file lives, which is where all the logic for the template will live. So this is the one that Helena will be demoing quite a bit in just a moment. And we have our static repo, which is where we have some more styles and a README. And we have our template.yaml, which is where our settings and our data bindings live. And so just to look at this in one more view within a text editor quickly, to give you a little bit of a better view before I hand over to Helena to demo this in more detail. The starting points also include lots of comments. So you can see what every single bit of the code means when you kind of clone this into your computer. So in our example that we're running locally, which I have here, we can see that we have an example setting, and that same example setting is existent in our template.yaml file through this formatting here. But I believe that is all I wanted to show for now, so I'm going to hand over. This slide is just repeating what I was just saying about the different files that exist by default. And there's also lots more information on what they are all for in detail in our developer docs. So feel free to head over there and ask any questions. Okay, then I'm going to stop sharing my screen because it is time to build a template. So I'm going to hand over to Helena.
Thanks. Okay, yeah, so we're going to dive into building a template. I'm going to pick up from where Louisa's left off. So in my code editor here, I've got just an empty skeleton template that I've made in the same way by running Flourish new and putting in my template name. And we're going to go through a demo now that starts from this empty template, adds a couple of settings and plays around with a few different things. We're going to start by running the template. We're then going to add some basic template settings. That's going to be a background color that we're going to add to the main template. So just start nice and simple. Then we're going to add some elements and manipulate them with some other settings. And then we'll finish by adding and connecting some data to our template, which will represent how we have the data sheet and the bindings that you'll be familiar with in other Flourish templates. And then we'll finish by publishing it so that we can see it back in the app on that My Templates page and see how we can go ahead straight in and make a creative visualization from the app. So it's quite a lot to get through, and it might be, like Louise said, a bit more advanced than some of our other tea breaks, but hopefully it will give you a good start to using the SDK yourself. So we've got my template, and the first thing I want to do is to just go through how you start adding settings to the template. And before we go and add our own setting, we're just going to go over what happens in the template.yaml and what happens in the index.js file. So in here, the template.yaml file is where we have at the top, we have some details about our template. So this is the very first thing we're going to change in a second, but this is where we can give an ID to our template. That's going to be when we publish it. It's going to be used as part of the URL for that showcase page of the template. And that's just kind of a name. Then we're going to have a sort of user-facing name for our template. So this is where the Moody's one was called the Moody's wheel. We can give a description if we want for what kind of thing can be made with that template, and then pop your name down here as the author of it. So that's what happens at the top of the template.yaml. Further down, there is an option to add some build processes in here. We're going to leave this one for now, and we're going to focus further down the template.yaml where we have the settings and the data bindings. So the settings here, this is where all the user faces settings that are going to appear in my template in the settings panel when I'm in the preview tab. We're going to use this settings object to add in all our properties and add descriptions for them and the types of settings, and to sort of create that settings panel. The data bindings sit also in the template.yaml underneath these settings, but we'll come to this section a bit later when we start adding data. So to start with, we're going to focus partly in this settings part of the template.yaml, and then also in the index.js file, which is found in our source folder. So just to give an idea of how these connect up, when we add settings to our template, we are giving them a section title, which is where we create the settings blocks, a property name here, which is going to be connecting back to our JavaScript. So this is how we're going to refer to that particular setting in our JavaScript, and how we're going to manipulate it and make the template do what we want to. Then we have a name, which is the name of the setting as it displays to the user, a description, and the type here is the type of setting we want to add. So depending on the type of setting you're wanting, above here in the sort of notes, we've got the different types that you can use for settings. So this will make a bit more sense once we start running the template. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and do now. So I'm just opening up my terminal and making sure I'm in the template directory. And I'm going to use the flourish run command. This is going to open up a local server where here I am now running the template. So this is my skeleton template. Whenever you make a new Flourish template with that Flourish new command, this is what you'll see when you open it before you change anything. So you can see I've got an empty template here because we're not actually doing anything and creating anything in our template yet, but we do have this first settings block and an example setting there. These bits here are what's being created by my template.yaml. So I'm just going to drag this over here. So we've got in my template.yaml, this example setting is what is being created over here on the right-hand side. So we'll come back and start building and changing this in a second. I just want to explain first how that connects up to the index.js. So you'll notice here, the name of this property is example_state_property. And if I open up my index.js file, you'll notice that that same property is written in this object. So in the index.js, we've got 4 important different parts to it. The data is the one that we're going to come back to later, which is where we're going to connect up the data sheet and data bindings. But we're going to focus on these 3 others to start with. First of all is this state object. So this is what is really connecting up the settings panel with what's going on in the template. We use it for 2 kinds of purposes. First of all, we use it to add the default settings for the template. So when someone goes and first makes a new visualization from your template, it's going to set the default value. So at the moment here, we've got our setting property set to 25 as the default value. And in my template, you can see that that is the default value that is in my setting. If I were to go and change this, pop 50 in here and save it again, once my template has reloaded, that's now populated it with the new default setting. So the state object first represents the default settings, but also as the user goes and changes the settings, that state object will be updated. So it will always represent the current state of the template, the current batch of settings that is creating that particular view. And just to reiterate again, how it connects up is the name of the property here is the same name as the property that you see in the template.yaml. So these need to be identical. Okay, so we're going to, first of all, we'll come back to these 2, which will make a bit more sense when we start using them. But we're going to first change this basic property into something that's going to do something a bit more interesting. And we're going to change it into a background color setting. So the first thing I'm going to do is change my section title. So this first settings block, I want to be my background settings. I'm going to change the property name to background_color. And we're going to change the user facing name. Change the description. And I no longer want a number setting, I want a color picker. And in order to get a color picker, I'm going to change my type to color. So I've saved that now, and I'm going to go back into my template so we can see what that's done. So we can see the section title has changed my settings block name to background. I've got my background color name here. When I hover over this question mark, that's what's showing me the description I've added. And now I've got a color picker setting instead of the number setting I had before. But at the moment, this isn't doing anything. I can still color pick, but it's not actually doing anything in my template because we haven't told it to do anything yet. So that's where we come to the other two parts of the index.js file. So I've saved this here. I'm coming back into my index.js. And I'm just going to nip back to my slides for a second. So when it comes to adding settings to your template, there's 4 steps you're going to want to do. You're wanting to add that user facing setting in the template.yaml. That's the first step we've already done. You're going to then want to add the default value of that setting to the state object back in the index.js. And then you're going to want to make the setting work by adding code in the index.js. And that's going to require calling different functions in the update and draw functions. So those are our 4 steps. We've done step 1 already, and now we're going to head to step 2, which is setting that default value in the state. So back in our code, we've got to update this property here to match the background color property we set in the template.yaml, and it's a color now. So instead of the color, I'm going to use a hex code in here so that we can set our default background color. Once I've set this here, back in my template, you can see that my color picker has updated, and this blue color is the default value for that color picker. So that's step 2. The next thing is we've got to actually make it do something, and that's where we come to these update and draw functions. So these are the 2 crucial functions that also happen in our kind of main JavaScript. And they have different functions, and where you're going to put your code will depend on when you want this to run and whether you want it to run when things change in the visualization. So the draw function is the one that will run once when the template first loads. So it's likely in this draw function, we're going to add things. So we might want to draw our elements or create our SVG in this draw function, because we always want that to run as soon as the template loads. And then the update function is the one that runs every time the user changes something in the template. So that's whether they go and change a setting, or whether they go and change or add their own data. And also when they're in a Flourish story, when you change slides, that will also trigger the update function. So the update function is what you're going to want to run every time the template needs to change something when someone changes a setting. So in this case, we're going to want our background color to change anytime someone goes and picks a different color in the color picker. So we're going to want to start by adding our code in the update function. So I'm going to drop in this code to our update function here. There's again some comments just to help you get started. And this is selecting the body of my template and styling the background color equal to our property of the state object here. So whenever you're referencing one of your properties, you're going to want to use state dot and then the name of the property. So back in our template now, you'll first notice that nothing has actually happened. But if I were to change the color picker now, the background color will change. And that's because the template is recognizing when there's a change in my settings, and it's updating the template because that update function is running. But one thing we'll notice is that the first load, the background color is not matching the background color from my state. And that's because only the draw function has run yet. So a common thing that you may want to do when you're building templates is add the update function so that it runs right at the end of your draw function as well. This is to avoid repeating code in both of these sections. If I just run my update function at the end of the draw, it will do everything it needs to do when it loads the template, plus just run through the update function once to bring that code in as well. So I'm going to, in my template now, at the end of my draw function, I'm going to add my update function just to run at the end. And if I go back to my template now, you'll see that on the first load, that background color, that state default color is applying to the template, but also whenever I change the color picker, the background color is now changing. So that's how the sort of update and draw functions work. So whenever you're adding code to manipulate something in your template, you're going to want to think about whether that just needs to happen once at the beginning when the template first loads, or whether you want that to rerun every time the user changes something in the template. So that's our first setting added, but we want to add some more elements now. So going back to our slides here, we're going to start with a nice simple one where we're just going to add a div, which will be a circle to our template. And then we will add a couple of different settings, a radius and a fill color that can be manipulated by the user. And that circle we create will adapt based on those settings. And we're going to follow the same 4 steps as before. We're going to add the settings first, then add the default values to the state, and then add our code to make them work. So to start with, we want to add some more settings. So I'm going back to the template.yaml, and I'm going to drop in my next settings. So I'm wanting to add another settings block here. So you'll notice what I first have is another heading section title, like our background one before. I'm now adding another settings block called circle, so that I'm going to have all my circle settings in here and make it easier to navigate for the user. So when you, in the YAML file, the template.yaml, the indentation is quite important. So using these hyphens to note when there's a property or a new section title, and then making sure everything's indented properly is important. So here I've just added 2 settings. I've got circle radius and named it radius, and that's a number setting, and circle fill color, just named fill color and name that color. So I will save this now, go back to my template, and I've got another settings block with these 2 here. Now they don't have any values in them because I haven't yet added the default settings to the state. So that's our next step. So back in our index.js, we're going to add the default values for these 2 settings we've just added by adding a comma after our background color and dropping in our default value. So we want our circle radius to default to 50 and our circle fill color to be this orangey red color. Back in our template, you can see that those defaults are now added to our settings. So we've got the settings set up, but now we need to create our circle and apply these settings to it so that the user can change these in the template and the circle will adapt. So again, this is where we start thinking about the draw and update functions. In this case, I'm going to want to draw my circle, create the circle, sorry, in my draw function, so that it's already on the template as soon as the user goes into it. And I might add a few styling things that are not to do with these settings there. And then in my update function, that's where I'm going to want to apply these settings so that whenever these settings are changed by the user, the circle will update. So the first thing is to create my circle in the draw function. So I'm just dropping in a little bit more code now that will then go on to explain. What I have here is just some really simple code. One thing to mention is that whenever we're doing this, you can use whatever libraries you want to build your templates. We're just using some really basic examples here, and a bit later on we'll be using D3, but this is totally flexible and up to you on how you want to make your templates. So right here, just to explain a little bit what I'm doing, I'm creating a div element. I'm then creating, sort of adding some styling to this. So border radius at 50% is just going to round it out to make it into a circular shape, and a couple of positioning styling elements. And this final line here is just appending my circle that I've created to the body of my template. So that's creating my circle in the draw function, but now I need to set the sort of size of my circle and the color of my circle, and I want to do that based on those settings that I've added. So I'm moving up to the update function now and dropping in a little more code. So this first line here, this is selecting the div that we've already created in draw. I'm using this, it's the only div I have on the page, so I'm just finding div. I'm then setting both the width and height of my div to the radius. I want the width and the height to be equal, and for them to be equal to my circle radius setting from the state. And then I'm setting the background color of my div to the circle fill color. So again, this is how you're referencing those state objects, is you just do the state dot and the name of the property as you've named it in the state and in the template.yaml. So I've added my code there to make it work, and we're going to go back to my template now. So this is the circle I've created. Already it's got the default state values. It's got a radius of 50 pixels and a fill color of this orange. But because we've added that code to the update function, whenever I change these now, my circle is going to resize when I use this radius function. And when I use my fill color, the circle is going to change the fill color based on my color picker. So that is the creating elements on the page, just a really basic element, but the same 4 steps, no matter what you're doing, is what you need to think about when you want to add to your template. So the last thing we're going to do is slightly different, and it's going to be about adding data. So if you've used other Flourish templates, you'll be familiar with the structure that we have our preview tab, which is a bit like what we've been working in the SDK, where we view our visualization and manipulate the settings. But there's also the data tab, where the user can upload their data and set the column bindings. So one thing to get used to with the SDK is there is no data tab to preview and test, but it will be visible in the app when that template is published. So we just need to follow a few different steps to add some default data to our template and start connecting it up so we can make use of it. So to add the data to your template, you'll notice that whenever you go into one of our Flourish templates and create a new visualization, there's already some default data in the data tab, which is partly to help you see the data structure you need. And it's also so you get this nice preview of a visualization that's already working. And we use that in the SDK to add the default data that will be in the template when someone makes it, but also to test how it works when we've got some data. So the first thing we need to do is add a CSV file to our template directory. And then we're going to add our data bindings, which is the column bindings that happen along the right-hand side in the data tab. They also go in the template.yaml. And then we'll be going back in the index.js, checking that we've got it all connected up, and then start building our template again using the data. And that works in a similar way. So there's quite a few steps to go through here. The first thing I'm going to do is add my data folder. So in the template directory, just in the root of this folder, I'm going to create a new folder called data. And within that folder, I'm going to create a new file, and this is just going to be called data.csv. So this is just a basic CSV file. I'm just going to drop in some basic data here. So I've got my first column is going to be fruit, and the second column is sold. So I've got my categories of fruit and then the number of them in my second column of data. So that's my data all added. And then heading back to my template.yaml. So I've got our CSV in there, but now I need to set up those data bindings. So that happens in the template.yaml. Underneath your settings, there is this data section. All of this, again, is documented more fully on the developer's documentation, but I'm going to drop in my bindings just to explain them a bit more here. So this is what data bindings should look like when you add them to this bit of the template.yaml. This is the format it's expecting. So first of all, I have here a key. This works in a similar way to the property name that we added up here. So this is what's going to be referenced in my JavaScript to sort of target this particular column binding. So in this case, I've got a label key and a value key. Each of these sections is a different binding. And you know that in my data, I had those 2 columns. So my label, the key is the name we're going to use in our JavaScript. The name is the user-facing name. So that is what will appear in this column binding section in the data tab to the user. The data set is just the name of your data set. You can choose this as you will, but that's how it will be referenced in your JavaScript as well. The type, this is important if you're creating a column binding where someone can select multiple columns. So in some of our templates, you can select multiple values columns. In this case, you'd want to use type equals columns rather than type equals column singular. In this case, I just want to allow one column for each, so I'm using that type. And finally, the column attribute here is telling me in my default data that I've got uploaded, which column is going to be which of these data bindings. So I want our label to be our fruit column. So that's column A, the first column in the data. And I want our value column to be column B. That's our sold column in the data. So the way these data bindings are set up is because someone can go and, when they're using this template, drop in their own data. So we can't be referencing things in this data and making our template work that way. We've got to use these data bindings so that whatever data is dropped in, the user can swap around the column bindings and we can recognize them as the particular properties that we need to use and build the template that way. So I've set up my column bindings here. Those are the two key steps to connecting up your data. I'm now going to head back to my index.js. And the first thing I'm going to do before we start jumping in is just to make sure if my data is connected properly. And the way I'm going to do that is just in this draw function, I'm going to console.log data. Once I've done this back in my template, I'm just going to inspect the page and open my console. And check here, you can see up the top here that console.log has just printed out my data array. So that's just how I'm checking that I've got it all set up correctly and got it all working. So you can see here, just by adding my data and adding the column bindings, you can see that it's connected the different column names here and my different rows in my data. So I've got label is fruit. Value is the sold column, and that's connected through the rows of my data. So for this first row, label is apples, value is 5. So that's where the template code magic has happened, and it's connected up the data with the column bindings that I've set. One thing to note, for that to work, for that magic to happen with the connecting up the data in the column bindings, you need to make sure that this line of code, number 1 here, is in your index.js. So this is creating this empty data object that's going to be used as the variable to access the data and connect up those column bindings and do that magic for you. So this is already in the skeleton template. You'll just want to leave it there so that that all connects up already. Okay, so we know that we've got our data connected to the template, okay? And now we want to do something with that data to add to our template. So this is where we're going to start building, just like we've done with the other elements using the update and draw functions. And in this case, we're going to use D3. So D3 is just a common data viz library that gives you a lot of flexibility over what you can build, and it's what we use to build most of our own Flourish templates. So in this part of the demo, we won't go too much into depth about how the D3 code is working, because you can use whatever libraries you want, but we're just going to use it as an example to show how you connect up data to your template. And in this case, what I'm aiming to do is create a bulleted list, add that to my template that's going to add a list item for each of our data points. So that's what I'm going to work towards. So the first thing I need to do, because I'm using a new library that's not part of our skeleton template, is I want to use npm install D3 just to make sure that the D3 functions are all accessible within my template. So if you're using any libraries, then make sure you're in your template directory and install the right libraries in the template. The next thing I want to do is to import that to the template. So I'm just going to import the couple of functions that I need here. So I'm adding one line at the top of my index.js, which is importing the select and select all functions from D3. So again, these are just particular functions that I need to add this list, but it will just be depending on the type of libraries and the code that you want to use. Okay, so now comes to that fourth step that we've come to before, which we've got all our data connected now, and we want to use these draw and update functions to add something to our template based on our data. So similarly before, I'm going to work out what code needs to go in which of these. In this case, I want to create my bulleted list in the draw function. So when the template first loads, I want it to grab the data and create my bulleted list, adding a list item for each row in my data. But I then also want to add some code to my update function because I want to make sure that my list is going to update whenever a user goes into the data sheet and changes or uploads some new data. We want the list to reflect that. So the first bit is adding my code to the draw function. So underneath here, I'm dropping in some code just to explain a little bit, but not in too much detail. I am selecting the body of my template, adding just an HTML unordered list sort of item. And then I'm using the D3 magic to add a list item for each row in my data. And just a little caveat here, this is just making sure that each row has got a value and a label before it adds my list item. So the one thing that's a bit crucial here to understand is this last text line. So this is the text that I actually want to appear in my bullet. So I want it to display, there are this number of this fruit, and that is what I want my bullet to say. So this is where, similar to when I've used targeting the state properties before, this is how I'm targeting the data properties in my data. So I'm using a function that can either be used in this format, function D, and with these curly brackets, or this just shorter way of writing it. And I'm using the value and label properties, which is what I've used in my data bindings here, label, lowercase, and value. And those are what are targeting the actual parts of my data that I want to add to my list elements. So this is hopefully going to make a bit more sense when we go back and see it in the template. But the final thing I want to do is just add the update function. So at the moment, this is just in draw. It's going to create my list, but it's not going to update when someone changes the data. So I need to add a little bit more D3 magic to my update function here. This is just selecting the list element I've created and adding bullets if new data has been added and removing bullets if data has been removed. So that's kind of just checking in on the data tab when that update function runs and updating my list accordingly. Okay, so we're going back into my template now, and you can see that based on the data that I've added, the default data, we've got this bulleted list. So I've got 5 apples, 6 bananas, there are 2 oranges. So this is the list that's been created by those details. I can go back to my template and I could update my data CSV here. Let's add some data in. So I'm just adding some data to that default data, and back in my template, my list is already updated. So that is the kind of final setting we wanted to show. But last thing is really publishing your template. So once your template is all set and ready and you're happy with the way it works, you're going to want to publish it so that you and anyone in your company, or if you want to have other people, if you're a free user, then other people will be able to use it as well. So that it's available in the app so you can make and reuse that template to make all kinds of visualizations. So this is where we come back to some of those Flourish commands that Louisa started with. There are a few useful ones before publishing your template. The first one is Flourish Who Am I? So this just checks whether you're logged in. So back in my template, I'm going to open up my terminal and run Flourish Who Am I? If you're logged in, this will return your Flourish username. So here I've got my Flourish username coming up there. So I am logged in. If you're not logged in, this command won't work, and you'll need to instead run the Flourish login and then type your email address, and then it will prompt you to log in with your Flourish password. And that is just a normal Flourish account that you have. It'll be the same login. So I'm already logged in and my template's all ready. So the command I want to use is Flourish publish. And before I've done this, I've already remembered one thing I think I haven't done. Yeah, so this is an error. If you do come across this error, the template YAML doesn't have an ID. So that was the first thing that I showed and forgot to fill in right at the top of your template.yaml. that information about the template. So I'm going to add my ID for my template here and a name for it. Let's call this our SDK webinar template, and let's add my name to the author as well while we're here. And now we will try Flourish Publish once more. So this is now uploading my template and preparing it. And this is where it's going to be added in the app to the same location that Louisa showed before. When I hit new visualization, under mine, this is where I will find it when it's uploaded. So this should just take a minute or so. And then we'll be able to test our template, just quickly try it out and change up the data and see how well it works. So these are just a couple, this is where it will all appear when it's all uploaded. Here we go. So it's now finished uploading and it gives me a direct link to where my template is located. So this was my showcase page. I've got my details here. My description would appear here if I put a more detailed one. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new visualization. So this is what my template now looks like to a user in the app. You can see I've now got my data tab here, which is populated with my default data. And I can go ahead and add or remove data from here. And you can see that my list element is updating accordingly. So this is where we've got our working template in the app that users can make a visualization, duplicate, reuse, just like any other Flourish template. Okay, so that is the kind of final part of our demo today. And I just wanted to finish on a couple of slides. This is, more on the advanced side. It's suitable and sort of targeted at developers who are wanting to make these reusable templates for their own users. But if making your own templates using this is a bit beyond your skill set, then we do have a services team that can work on bespoke projects and build templates for you. We've put a couple of contact information emails here. So if you are interested in us building templates for you, then get in touch and we can scope them out for you. And on this last slide here, we've just got a few resources. So seeing as we've got a couple of minutes now, I just wanted to show some of these resources. The first one is the Flourish developers documentation that we've mentioned a couple of times. So in the SDK bit here, you will find all kinds of information about getting started and all the guides that can step you through this, and some more information about how everything works. We've also got a blog post. This is a blog post which was based on one of our users, or one of our customers who created their own template in the SDK. They've created this really impressive bubble network chart style grid template, which they've made public for people to use. But we did a bit of a Q&A with them about how they created this template. So that might be of interest to you. And then the final resource I've got linked here is Gitter, not quite sure. This is if you do have trouble making templates with the SDK, then you can come onto our forum here and ask us any questions if you do need to. So these slides, like any other T-Break recording, will be uploaded to our training page afterwards. I'll just show that last thing. So on our training page, click on attend a webinar and you'll be able to find not only the links to sign up to upcoming T-Breaks, but also on this next page here, you'll be able to find all our past T-Break webinars with the YouTube recording, the slides, and any data that was used in them. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending our T-Break. We hope it was helpful and know that this one was a bit more of an advanced one, but hopefully it will get you started making all kinds of exciting templates with the SDK.